Hello, I'm Elliot Trotter on behalf of Exquisite Disarray Publishing with the winner of our first book contest, Jeremy Halinen. Jeremy, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Could you please start by introducing yourself? Who are you and where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in Tacoma, was born here in Seattle. I've been writing poetry since college, and before that I wrote fiction ever since I was about 10 years old. So I've been a writer most of my thinking life.
Okay. Could you talk more about your poetic history? Like, when did you start writing? When did you first encounter poetry?
I think I first started writing a few poems when I was in my early teens, and I was reading it in high school classes, and I didn't really fall in love with it until college. I was reading an anthology of African American poetry, and it really struck me in a way that poetry hadn't before. I guess the social aspects to it.
Do you remember any poems specifically that stuck out to you, or writers that did?
Well, Gwendolyn Brooks' "We Real Cool," I know that influenced me too. But there was many different writers. Langston Hughes was one who I appreciated.
Do you know at the time what made you connect to some of those pieces?
I think it was. I think I've always had a strong sense of social justice, and I see people who are downtrodden in our society. I mean, even now, African Americans, I don't think have really achieved full parity, and so there was a lot for them to speak out against at the time, a lot of injustice, and I think that's what struck me the most.
Where do you think your sense of social justice comes from? Is it your parents? Is it from some education in your youth?
Probably from just the reading I've done throughout my life. And my high school English teacher was also, he had us read Invisible Man by Rolf Ellison. We did discuss a lot of history of the U.S. and world history as far as different inequities involved. So I guess I've just kind of naturally had an interest in that.
Okay. Why, and this might be a easy or difficult question, why do you write poetry? Why do you write?
I think I write mainly because I enjoy the sounds of language, and it's almost playful for me. It's fun. It engages my mind in a way that nothing else besides maybe playing piano does. So kind of, I feel like sometimes when especially after I've written the first draft of a poem and I'm working on it again, I feel like time kind of disappears while I'm in that mindset, and that's kind of a cool state to be in.
You mentioned that you're a pianist as well. Do you find that often relates to your poetry?
I think so. I think a lot of my piano music kind of has a darkness to it as well. I compose my own music, kind of ad lib, and have been doing that for about 17 years now. And so I do think there's certainly an emotional connection or a tonal connection between what I play and how I write.
You were talking a lot about how some of your influences and how you've kind of picked up pieces of different elements of poetry over the years. How would you say your poetry has evolved over time, and how has your subject focus changed?
As far as focus goes, sometimes I don't feel that I have a focus as far as subject. But as I put together a book, I do feel like I am focusing at that point. But when I'm actually writing, I feel like I'm just kind of following the language where it takes me and experimenting somewhat. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm highly experimenting with form, but enough to keep it interesting for me. I think it's become more finely chiseled. I think I pay more and more attention to each word and each syllable, each sound than I did before. during the last month as I've been proofreading and reading over the book as it's been laid out and designed, I keep cutting little pieces out of poems that I feel aren't quite right, and so I feel like it is getting narrowed as much as I can, sculpted or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Has your style changed over time? Were you more focused on different ways of communicating from what you are now?
Well, I think my style has always been more what you would call a page poet style, although I'm very attuned to the sounds of the spoken word. I feel like for me the poems perform on the page more than they do, or as much as they do when they're read aloud. And I've never been, I don't know, I feel like the slam poets tend to be more flamboyant than I am, or more evocative than I am physically in a way, so I've never gone that direction as far as performance poetry, but I enjoy that aspect as well. So I've kind of tried to be in the middle of those two spectrums, I guess, as much as I can. But honestly, I don't think too much about style when I'm writing. I think about it kind of afterwards, and then it's more about the music of the line than anything else, I think.
To talk about the actual process itself, what is your creative process like? Do you collect pieces of poems and eventually they fall together? Do you sit down and it just comes out of you?
I've never been very good at structuring writing time, which is probably to my detriment. About half the time I would say some fragment of language will be bouncing around in my head for a while, and then I'll say, I better sit down and just follow that where it goes, and so just a line might come to me. Or occasionally, I'll be laying in bed late at night and really want to go to sleep, but I'll have more or less kind of the outline of a poem come to me, and then I'll say, okay, I better get up and write it down. And that poem History in my book, which is a fairly long poem, I don't write long poems very often, pretty much came to me right before I was going to bed one night, and I thought, I better write this now. And I'm glad I did, but I was just like dead tired as I was kind of scribbling it out, and I think I was just writing it out by hand in the dark because I didn't feel like turning the light on.
What's that moment of inspiration like? What does it feel like? Where does it come from? How do you know that you've hit something right?
It's kind of I feel like there's kind of a sense of pressure in my skull somewhere. That's the best way to say it. Like, I feel like, okay, language, whatever neurons are dealing with language right now are really active. I can feel them firing a lot, so I feel when I'm in that state, whether it's the muse or who knows what, I feel like I need to sit down and write. That intense pressure doesn't be all that often, but every month or so maybe it does, and I usually have found it beneficial to listen to it.
Who would you say are your teachers of poetry? Who have you learned from? Who influences you, be it a poet or public figures? So who, in a sense, are your heroes, and why?
Well, I've had so many excellent teachers over the years, but Ron Bays is one poet in North Carolina, and I studied with him during my undergrad. Carl Phillips is probably my favorite poet ever.
Why is that?
I love the way he explores kind of the dark side of the mind and of relationships, and his poems are often meditative and a little bit sad, sometimes deeply sad, but sometimes almost indifferent in a way, and so I don't know, I like that mixture. And he has beautifully long sentences with elaborate syntax that I just really admire. So I love to kind of emulate that. Mm-hmm. I don't tend to follow pop culture at all, so I don't really feel like there's any pop icons I'm following. And I don't really, I do follow politics, but I don't feel like I really take much of the rhetoric of politics and put that in my poetry. I think some poets do and do it to good effect, but that's not really my focus.
Tell me about the moment that you received this call or email, or maybe it was a text, that you had been selected for this first book contest. Where were you? What sort of emotions did you feel?
Well, I was at home. It was late at night, and I got an email. And honestly, at first, I was like, "What?" It didn't really register. I was like, "What? I won?" So I was really surprised. I don't know. I guess, I've entered a number of contests over the years, and I've been a finalist before, but I just didn't expect to win. I thought maybe I'd be a finalist again. And so yeah, it was a nice surprise.
How does being selected by Exquisite Disarray change your view, if it does change your view of yourself as a poet or a writer?
Well, one thing that I think it makes me feel validated in that I feel like oftentimes my work is on the edgy side, and I feel like sometimes, I'm afraid that people won't be very receptive to it, or certain people won't be, and that maybe more, respectable audiences might find it objectionable. So the fact that, a respectable new press was willing to take a chance on me, that was really encouraging. And having, Kathleen Flanagan selected was great, and all the support that Exquisite Disarray and everyone on the board has shown has been really nice.
You are, in a sense, very much a Northwest poet. In an interview with Tacoma City Arts Magazine, you talked about living in Tacoma for a long portion of your life, also in Spokane and Bellingham, and now Seattle. How has the Northwest influenced your work?
Well, I would say that there's a lot of clouds and rain in the Northwest, which I think has definitely affected my overall outlook on life. Maybe not. I wouldn't say I'm a gloomy person, but I think that there is a darkness to my work, and which I actually enjoy. I think if I was always focused on the light side of things, I would be bored.
In 2008, your poem "My City" appeared in Best Gay Poetry 2008 from the Midsummer Night's Press. Do you identify as a gay poet? How does that label strike you?
I do. In some ways, I prefer the word queer because I feel it's even more inclusive. Because if it feels like I'm part of a large community if I identify as queer, although I do identify as gay as well. So I feel like, and then even if you're gay, there's different subcultures in that culture, so you can identify. I don't know. As far as labels go, I've thought about that before. Do I want to be known only as a gay poet? Not particularly. I'd just like to be known as a poet, but I don't at all mind the fact that people would view my work, or at least certain aspects of it, as gay or queer. As I do feel like I want it to speak to the queer community, but I also want to speak to the whole human community as well. I don't want it to be just focused just for certain people, and to block everyone else out. I feel our task as poets is to connect people and to open people's minds to different experiences, and different ways of being.
Your work has been considered controversial. You just said that you see your work as edgy at times.
Yeah.
Why do you think others see that? Why do you see that?
Well, I think because, especially, I don't think my work would be considered too edgy, say, if I were living in Europe, maybe in France or something like that. But I think, especially, I don't know, probably ever since Reagan took office, which was about when I was born, I think our country has kind of slipped farther and farther to the right. I feel like culturally you still have a wide array of I guess what you call like film, entertainment that's really pushing boundaries, but I think people in poetry expect that it's going to be fairly tame and, something that you don't mind your grandmother reading.